Hey everyone, it's Alyce, and I'm here today with a bit of a late April wrap-up. So I only finished 3 books in the second half of April, but I thought I would share my thoughts on those with you today, and sadly it's not been the best end to a month reading-wise. The beginning of April was a lot more successful. I read Under the Whispering Door and it was quickly becoming one of my favourite books of all time, and then I made the mistake of reading some more anticipated releases, and so I'm going to start this off with Mark My Words by Mohammed Khan, which is a YA contemporary book about a girl called Dua. Her school has just become part of a... oh god, I can't remember what it's called. It's like the two schools are working together because Dua's school is getting a lot of work done on it, so they need to like join up with this other academy so that their children don't find that their lessons are disrupted where there's all the work going on campus. But the kids from the lower class end of London have been shoved in with the upper class rich kids, and tensions are rising. And Dua realises that there's some kind of drug problem in the school, so because she is a wannabe journalist, she sets up her own newspaper and she decides to investigate what's going on. I have been anticipating this book for like 2 years now. It was meant to come out in 2019, I think. Then the pandemic hit and it got pushed back to 2020. So it would have been supposed to come out in 2020, but the pandemic pushed back to 2021. So obviously originally announced in 2019, actually finally came out in February, and I ended up giving it 2 stars. So the fact that I gave it less stars than years I have been excited about reading it is not the best. The problem that I have with Mohammed Khan's books is that I feel as though he tries too hard to use as much slang and as many pop culture references as he possibly can. This might be realistic because he is a school teacher, so obviously he is around young people, his target audience, all day long, and he's going to see a lot of that language, he's going to see a lot of that behaviour, so he is going to have more of a knowledge about what would be realistic. But when you're cramming that much into quite a small book size, it feels very contrived and very forced, so that's not the best. There's a bit of a subplot with Dua's mum because she's getting bullied at work and she has a mental breakdown, so Dua has to go and live with her dad for a bit, and that again wasn't very well explored. It was a case of it gave Dua the motivation to investigate everything, because at the beginning she's very focused on her mother's health, and she's very much focused on looking after her mum. She's not that invested in her journalism because she's prioritising her family, so it feels like a bit of a strange way to get her to stop prioritising, to like literally, oh, my mental health is that bad that you have to move in with your father, and then you're going to basically stop mentioning me for a few chapters because you're going to be so obsessed with this thing that's going on. I can't really put my finger on why I didn't like it. I just didn't. Sean DNF'd it after the first chapter because he was like, I'm not going to be able to get on with the character, and I ended the book wishing that I DNF'd it too because it didn't do what I wanted it to. And as somebody who always was interested in journalism, wrote for the school newspaper, was really interested in seeing a teen journalist in this kind of gritty contemporary novel, for it to be that big of a disappointment is such a shame. The next book that I read in April was Gallant by Schwab, and this was also not great. And I hate saying that because I have 3 fucking copies of it, but I didn't like it. And this is the first Victoria Schwab book that I have given less than 3 stars. I'm giving it 2.5 stars because it's just unbearably average. If you've read a V. Schwab book before, you've basically already read Gallant. There's the kind of discussion of the link between worlds, like the idea of like life and death, travelling through like a portal to another dimension, all things that are discussed in the archive, discussed in A Dark Shade of Magic, discussed in City of Ghosts. So it is starting to feel like once you've read one V. Schwab book, you have read them all, which is a shame because I was so excited about this one. The cover is gorgeous, the hype was intense. I loved the fact that the main character is mute, It was a very interesting dynamic because Olivia doesn't speak to anybody. She communicates using sign. And when she travels to this other dimension, trying not to give too many spoilers away, but there's like two versions of Gallant. That's pretty obvious based off of the cover. And when she travels through this dimension to be able to see the other version, she can communicate mentally with the characters there, which is very interesting. But it feels quite unexplored. It's an aspect of her personality, and obviously an aspect of her character. And a lot of people are mute in real life without any kind of explanation, but when you're making it seem like it is part of this bigger plot, it's part of the story and it's not explored very well, it didn't really make much sense. It's also marketed as YA, but it feels more like a middle grade. The writing style is very simplistic. It starts off and it feels like it's trying to be like a darker version of a Jacqueline Wilson novel. She's staying in an orphanage, and the time period that it's set in is very vague and unclear. It definitely feels historical, but that's also not the best developed, because you've just got this orphanage and this idea of like they use she gets picked up by a taxi, but then when they're driving out, it sounds like they're going past a lot of factories and like steam like factories that are using coal power. Lots of discussion of like the greying of the clouds and the ash and things around. So it definitely feels older, but I can't put my finger on when. And like, if I'm gonna be honest with you, it just didn't do anything for me emotionally. I didn't care. There's a lot of death in this book, there's a lot of ghosts in this book, but it just felt so emotionally flat. I wasn't invested in any of the characters. I just wanted it to be over. There's a lot of illustrations that I read the version on my Kindle from the library app, but there were a lot of illustrations that were used very consistently. If there had been a wider variety of illustrations, I might have enjoyed it a bit more, but it felt like at the end of every chapter it's one of the things we've already seen. Just these same motifs coming up again and again and again and again. And there's also the letters. Olivia has a journal that her mother left her, like an old diary, and her mother's diary entries are interspersed throughout the first few chapters, but then the same entries just keep getting referred to later, getting spliced in later, so it's very repetitive. And when you look at the fact that this book's just over 300 pages and there's that much repetition in it, there's just not a hell of a lot going on. It feels like one kind of vignette from a very larger story. If this was part of a longer series, I may have rated it higher, because there is a lot of potential for expansion of the world, a lot of potential for expansion with these characters, but the fact that it is meant to be a standalone, it's thoroughly unsatisfactory, and I don't know why it's as hyped as it is. I'm guessing probably because it's V. Schwab and it has the most gorgeous cover I've ever seen. This is the Owl Crate edition. Like, even though I didn't like the book, I'm so glad I ordered this, because this edition is just freaking stunning. Like, I'm keeping this, even though I didn't like the book all that much, because it is really beautiful. But I was just expecting a lot more from this. I thought this was going to be a new favourite, and it definitely wasn't. However, the third book I'm going to talk to you about today was a new favourite, and I'm very surprised by this one, because it was Wither by Lauren DeStefano, which is the first book in the Chemical Garden trilogy. This is like an old YA dystopian. This came out... oh god, I can't even see when it came out. That's how old it is. It doesn't even have a date. When were you published?
3 hours later.
2011. So this book is over 10 years old. It shouldn't have been as good as it was, but I really freaking loved it. So in Wither, there is some kind of problem with the human population that means that women die when they hit 20 and men die when they hit 25. So all of the younger generations, the like older generation, continue to age up, but all of their children and their grandchildren have all died, and it's just all of these generations of teenagers who know that they're going to die when they hit 20 and 25, so they're getting married very young, having babies very young, just trying to help the human population continue while the older generation attempt to discover a cure. And we're following a character called Ryan Ellery. At the beginning of the book, she has just been kidnapped and she is chosen to become one of the wives for her new husband, to replace his current wife, who is 20 and is dying. And Ryan doesn't want to be there. She wants to get home to her brother, who is over the other side of the country. This is set in America. And she doesn't want to be there at all, but she obviously doesn't have a choice in it. So she decides to make the best of a terrible situation, get herself into the good graces with her husband, so that when she does have that opportunity to escape, she'll be more likely to be able to. And I just thought that the whole thing was great. I loved the world building. The way that the science behind it all was described, I find very fascinating. Ryan's backstory of like coming from these parents who were geneticists, they thought they were going to be able to discover the cure. Then their lab got bombed, so her and her brother became orphaned. I thought it was a very compelling reason for it to just be her and her brother. It wasn't like, oh, parents are dead, that's it, which is a typical YA dystopian trope. But actually having that reasoning behind it, it feels like it might become more relevant in the future, which is interesting. I also find the relationship between Ryan and the other two sister wives to be very compelling. There's a younger girl who is just 13, but she has been raised in an orphanage where they're kind of groomed to become these wives. So they're meant to be the perfect new wives for the husbands. And Ryan is very surprised by this other character. Try not to get too spoilery, because obviously you wouldn't have met any of them yet if you haven't read it yet. But she is very surprised by this character and the fact that she's that much younger, but she's happy in this situation when all Ryan wants is her freedom back. And there's another character, I think his name's Gabriel? Yeah. And he's one of the servants in the house. Ryan and him have a bit of a connection. There might be a little bit of a romance going on there. But he is also like, he's been a servant in this house for so long that he's basically forgotten what freedom is. And he says to Ryan at one point, he's like, why would you not want to be here? Like, why would you want to be outside? And she's like, because I want to be free. And the fact that he's kind of completely forgotten even the concept of freedom because he's been there for so long, it does make you think a lot more about the mentality of people in these kind of novels. Because a lot of the time in YA dystopians particularly, the servants and the staff members are just in the background. They're most times not even named characters, and they're just happily going along with their duties and not really having any further life. And it does make you think that like that's a really clever justification for why that might be. It's not a case that they're begrudging of their jobs, it's because they've been in these jobs for so long that they have forgotten that idea of freedom, and like that is their life. So they're happy going through those motions every day anyway. I'm very, very interested in carrying on with this series, which I didn't think I would be. I have heard, like, mixed things. A lot of people say it's boring, but I was really compelled. Something about the writing style just propelled me along, and I was so happy reading this one. I just wanted to know what was going to happen next. I was interested in the relationship with the sister wives. I was interested in Ryan's relationship with Gabriel. I was interested in seeing whether there were going to be any escape attempts, or whether she might end up kind of experiencing Stockholm Syndrome and becoming comfortable in this situation herself. There was just a lot that it's very intimate. It's a very small, kind of cozy dystopian, because instead of exploring this huge wide world and like, oh, we're going to try and save the world, it's very focused just on Ryan being in this mansion and being in this new situation, this new marriage. But I just found it all so interesting and so compelling. And I think because toward the end of the book, things are going in a direction where I believe that it might be more of the wider world that is explored throughout the second and third novels. So I think that it's going to become more of your typical dystopian girl tries to save the world in the next couple of installments. But I'm so interested to see what she does and how she does it. Yeah, I can't really say much more about it without getting too spoilery. I know it's 11 years old, so I shouldn't be worrying about spoiling it. But if you're like me, and this is one of those ones that the cover's really compelling, the cover is absolutely stunning. That is literally the only reason I picked it up. But if you're one of those people that buys the book because it has a beautiful cover and then just doesn't pick it up for ages, and you happen to have this one sitting around, I definitely recommend it, especially for people who are big dystopian readers, because back in the day, all I read was dystopian. Recently, whenever I try and dip into them, like I try and read modern YA dystopian, like more recent releases, or I try to read the YA dystopians that I missed from further back, they always end up disappointing me. Delirium, I think I gave it 3 stars. The Match trilogy, I ended up absolutely hating it. But this one was a very pleasant 4-star and has left me feeling very positive about carrying on with the rest of the series. And that is all I can ask for. And so those are all the books I'm going to talk about with you today. Only managed to finish 3 in the second half of the month, and you'll also notice that I don't have Morningstar on here. And in my mid-month reading update, I said I would definitely have finished that by the end of the month, but I'm just going to take that as the world's longest reread. I'm going to eke it out until we've got some more news about the potentially titled Lightbringer. 6th book in the series. I'm just going to eke that reread out until I can crack on with Iron Gold and Dark Age with an end in sight for when the 6th book is coming. And yeah, hopefully I might get it finished this month, or I might get it finished next month, but you can expect to hear some more thoughts on that one soon. I also forgot to mention a whole ass book, so here is a very, very brief note that Tits, Boobies and Loons and Other Birds Named by People Who Hate Birds by Stuart Royal got 3 stars. It's basically just illustrations about birds who have terrible names, and Sophia loved it. There's some strong language, so try to censor yourself if you read it around kids, but yeah, we read this one twice this month and I still somehow forgot to mention it. We post new videos every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday, so we'll see you again in a couple of days with another video. If you like this video, please like it. If you'd like to let me know your thoughts on any of these books, I know that not liking Gallant is going to be an unpopular opinion, so please don't hate me. But yeah, feel free to discuss it down in the comments and I'll get back to you, and if you'd like to subscribe, we'd be super duper grateful. Thank you for watching. Bye! Don't forget to do your thumbnail.